In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Now we are going to conclude the discussion of cooperative principle, which appeared on page 33, and now we are on page 41, okay? Page 41 talks about the limitation of the cooperative principle, which began on page 31. Okay, we are going to conclude the discussion with this limitation. Okay, on page 41, we have something like this. A major objection that one may have to the Grice's model is that different cultures, countries, communities have their own ways of observing and expressing maxims. So it is something that varies from language to language, from culture to culture, from community to community. Okay, it is different. So we have to be very careful about these cooperative principles, because culturally, maybe you want to say something, but they understand something else. Let us see. So we have something like this. A major objection that one may have to the Grice's model is that different cultures, communities, and countries have their own ways of observing and expressing maxims. For example, if you actually go to line 1, 2, 3, 4 to the bottom, we will find something like this. We'll call you in about 2 weeks in an office, in an interview, or something like this. In our culture, in the Iranian culture, in the Arabic culture, we can, if you want to say no to a person to be interviewed, who is going to be interviewed, we actually say something like this. We'll call you about 2 weeks. It means we will never call you. Okay? We don't want to actually be very cooperative. We don't want to be very cooperative, but we don't want to, in fact, have problems with the, in fact, understanding of this by the interviewee. We say simply, well, we'll call you about in 2 weeks, in about 2 weeks. What does it mean? We never call you, we don't want you, so you are rejected, you are thrown out of this office. But in other cultures, like our culture or your culture, it is acceptable. But not in an English-speaking country. Let us see. In Britain, it is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to say, well, we'll call you in about 2 weeks. And then not call at all, as this would seem to be considered a violation of the maximum quality. Whereas in our cultures, it is acceptable and perfectly acceptable. Okay, this is quite normal way of flouting the maxim and say something. We are not interested in you. We are going to, in fact, throw you out of the office. Okay? This is like that. So this is considered a limitation of the cooperative principle, which varies. One thing varies from culture to culture, which is different from one culture to another culture. The page 42 gives you another example. Of, in fact, limitation of these maxims of quantity. In some cultures, it is not perfectly acceptable when you are going to talk about some people, You are not going to, in fact, you're not going to have have label for that person. Okay, let us see. My nephew Paul came around last night. In Iran, they say my nephew. They don't say my nephew Paul. Okay, my nephew came round last night without Paul. Or if we want to have something like this, we say my nephew came round, his name is like Paul. But in another culture, maybe it is part of the culture to, in fact, label that person. So line 1 and 2 says something like this. In Britain, to talk of a family member, always giving them the label of the relationship, the kind of relationship that you have with that person. Okay, kinship relationship. So, my nephew Paul, okay, is thought to be unnecessary and opting out of the maxim. But in other cultures, it is possible. This is another example. But a better example is the way we say how are you in different cultures. In the United States, line 4, the question of how are you expects the answer fine. Any interlocutor that launches into a full description of their state of health would again be thought to be violating the maximum quality. So you say, how are you? You say, fine. While you are in fact infected with the worst kind of, let's say, disease, let's say COVID-19. So how are you doesn't mean fine. But in the United States, how are you? It means fine. Of course, in Iraq, it actually means something like this. So when there is something like, how are you? We could say, أنا بخير. أنا بخير, for example. But أنا بخير is not a question about the state of health of a person. And in Iran, they say, خوبی? Question. Answer, خوبم. Okay? So two friends could come to say, خوبی? خوبم. What does this mean? خوبم, does it mean that I am not, in fact, I am not sick? It doesn't say anything about that. So if we actually ask a person, how are you? And he or she says, fine, doesn't mean in the United States, in Iran, in Iraq. It doesn't mean in Iraq. It doesn't mean that the person is not, in fact, it's not the question of about the health of that person. But in other cultures, it is. Let us see. So fine expects the answer. Fine, line 5. Any interlocutor that launches into a full description of their state of health would again be thought to be violating the maximum quantity. However, I'm going to repeat this part. However, on the other hand, in other cultures, how are you is a genuine request for the state of health. So they say, how are you? They want to have an inquiry whether you have got something like a kind of disease or not. But in our culture, it's considered to be a kind of greeting. For other cultures, it is considered to be a kind of, in fact, a state of asking about the state of health of that person. So there are two types of things. There are two types of how are yous in two different cultures. This is another example about the limitation of the cooperative principle, because it varies from culture to culture. Or let us look at another example. In one culture, it is quite possible to say in one English culture even. It is easily possible to say line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Line 10 of the page 42. Page 42, line 10. You are in somebody's home and you say, do you find it's getting a bit chilly in here? Do you find it's getting a bit chilly in here? What does it mean? It means something like, put the fire on. Put the fire on. In another culture, more direct answers are required, like this, line 11, 12, like 12, 2 lines below it. In another culture, this is the way. I'm cold. Is it okay if I put the fire on? I'm cold. Is it okay if I put the fire on? So it means that there are so many different kinds of speech acts and cooperative principles. And the cooperative principle, in fact, could be achieved in a series of different types of, in fact, acts, like the two ones that we have. Do you find it's getting blah 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 blah, or I'm cold? Is it okay blah blah blah? So this is related to the manner of politeness and cultural conventions, as the book says. Politeness is a topic of Unit A6 and 2D6. Now, number 2 of the limitations. We are still talking about the limitations. Sometimes there is an overlap between one maxim and another. Let us look. Suppose you say something like this. What did you have to eat? What did you have to eat? And the person says, oh, something masquerading as chicken chaser. Chicken chaser. Oh, something masquerading as chicken chaser. Chicken chaser is a kind of, let's say, meal with a chicken. Different kinds of soup, etc. on it. Different kinds of sauce on it. Chicken chaser. Okay. The B says something called chicken chaser. Masquerading here is not something like cold, something like something under the name of chicken chaser. Under the name of. Here, masquerading is under the name of, with the name. What does it mean? The person means that he or she doesn't like that kind of chicken, that kind of meal. Okay? So, he would say something like this. Oh, something masquerading as chicken chaser. Let us look at this answer. Line by line, I'm going to read this part for you. Below it, it is written here, B is flouting the maxim of quality. Why? By saying that his food was pretending to be something, and thus implying that it was not chicken chaser. Well, they called it chicken chaser. I don't like it. I don't like to call it chicken chaser. It was nonsense. It was not delicious. It was bland. So it is flouting the maximum quality. Okay, number 1. At the same time, let's read line 2. However, it could also be said that he is flouting the maxim of manner. Why? Because he does not say exactly what the something was. There was something. They don't want to call it. It was something similar to a chicken chaser. Let's not call it a chicken chaser. So, I want to say that it's a kind of flouting something else. In addition to the flouting the maxim of quality, it is also flouting the maxim of manner. Okay? Because it does not say exactly what the something was or looked like it was. Now we are going to talk about the third maxim violation or flouting. Then again, he could be line 1, 2, 3, 4. Then again, he could also be flouting the maxim of quantity, because he does not give enough information to identify what he ate. So, he does not want to identify that kind of thing that he ate. So, it is again violation or flouting the maxim of quantity. The 3 maxims are violated in one thing. So, back to the previous paragraph, paragraph 2 of page 42, it is something like this. The second problem with the cooperative principle is that there is often an overlap between the 4 maxims. In this conversation, 3 kinds of maxims were violated in one single utterance, in one single answer. So this is another problem. Now let us go to the next paragraph with another limitation. The paragraph begins with, in the next example, page 42, in the next example, the meaning lies in a flouting of maxim of both quantity and manner. Let us see. The meaning lies in the flouting of maxim of both quantity and manner. Let us see. Pat says, how is it going with fail? How is it going with fail? Melanie answers, one of us thinks it's okay. It's okay with him. What does it mean? What does Melanie mean? What does she actually mean? What does this sentence mean? One of us thinks it's okay. You see that the person actually violates, or in fact flouts 2 maxims at the same time, quantity and manner. Well, so back to, in fact, page 41. On page 41, I wanted to have the limitations, and these are the limitations, and I am done with the limitations. In the next example, I am going to talk about something quite different, called the relevance theory. Okay? The relevance theory. Thank you very much.